Wander Wealthy Podcast, episode 243. Hello there. Welcome back to another episode of the Wander Wealthy Podcast. If you are brand new to this show, my name is Tess Wicks, and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm the founder of Wander Wealthy and also financial coach turned business coach on a mission to bring more financial literacy and confidence to the world by bringing more money coaches to the world. And today I am sharing with you some of my best tips around creating content easily and consistently. You see, here at Wander Wealthy, when it comes to building a money coaching business, I want to make sure that I give the best guidance around how to do that without having a ton of upfront resources. Those might look like resources to be able to invest into advertising, paying for things like Facebook ads and whatnot, or resources to be able to invest into personnel who then can take your sales and marketing and run with it. And so we really focus on leveraging content marketing to help you establish your authority and expertise in the space, to help you connect with your ideal clients on a platform where they're already spending time and hanging out, and to help you get comfortable talking about and marketing and selling your coaching service and offering and program, whatever you want to call it. And so with that in mind, I think that so many of us can find ourselves getting into a little bit of a content funk or having a really hard time even wrapping our minds around the idea of being able to create content consistently. I know when I was at the beginning of my journey, I would think about, whether, and believe me, I wanted to do it all. So when I would think about having a blog and a podcast and a YouTube channel and all the content I had to create there, I would just assume, without even trying, that I was going to run out of things to talk about and things to say. And that really bogged me down. And then also just the idea of creating so much content also bogged me down that I almost wouldn't even get started. So we are going to have a series of episodes kind of coming out around content creation. I've already talked about my content routine in episode 240. So if you didn't listen to that one, you can check that one out. And you might hear a little bit of things being repeated, but I definitely wanted to approach this from a different angle to give you some really good tips. But we're also going to be talking a little bit more about action taking and motivation and also visibility. So those are some kind of themes that you can be expecting in the next couple of weeks from this here podcast. And I wanted to kind of shine a light on these things because at the end of the day, what you need to do, you probably already know it, or you have a good idea of it. And if you're lacking, just take a gander through the wanderwealthypodcast.com website and all the episodes that are there. And I'm sure you'll end up after, binging a handful of episodes with a long list of things you need to do. The problem is so many of us get stuck in actually doing the thing. And whether that's because we get into kind of this analysis paralysis, getting overwhelmed with all of the information that we feel like we need to ingest first before we can take action, or we have an underlying fear around taking said action, or we just, find ourselves stuck in a rut and we can't quite understand what that reason is. And the truth is, what's keeping you from where you are and where you want to go is typically actually the action taking component. So lots to come for you in the next few weeks. But today, like I said, we are focusing on content creation. Now, we're already well into this podcast episode, but I need to make sure that I mention this week's podcast episode sponsor, which is the Client Attraction Content Matrix. So it's perfectly suited for me to talk about within the context of this week's episode because the Client Attraction Content Matrix is one of my power tools that I use on a daily basis within my business. Because I do walk my talk, I majority of the time use content marketing to reach my ideal clients. You are listening to a piece of my marketing plan right now. My podcast is a great example of how I use content marketing to reach my ideal clients. And I also use social media and whatnot. But anyway, all that to say, I use the Content Matrix, which is a proprietary tool that I came up with to help myself and to also help my clients and any of you create great, highly resonating, high converting content that allows you to market and sell your program or whatever offer you have going on at the moment to your ideal clients. Now, without getting into the nuts and bolts and the weeds of everything, basically this client attraction content matrix is a full-on mini course to help educate you around content marketing as a business strategy and, what you need to do and what you need to understand about it so that you can best utilize the tool, which is the Content Matrix. You are also, of course, going to be getting the Content Matrix, which is a beautiful and well-oiled spreadsheet that will help you ideate over 160 content ideas that, like I said, resonate and are sure to convert your ideal clients into paying clients that are now real, and as well as an amazing content calendar that goes along with it, plus some really, really great bonuses, one of which being a lot of content ideas perfectly suited for money coaches. So if this is something that you want to get your hands on, I have it available on my website. You can go to wanderwealthy.com/content to just get your hands on the matrix, make that investment, and see your life change in front of your eyes. It is something that I teach inside of the Wealthy Coach Blueprint, which is my much larger, higher level business coaching program. And so many of my clients within the Blueprint just absolutely love the content matrix and how it all makes sense and flows together. If you want a little sneaky inside peek, you can also get the content matrix for a great discount by first investing in the pricing formula. So that will unlock a really great deal for you to join the content matrix, the client attraction content matrix, and you can get your hands on the pricing formula, which is an amazing step-by-step guide to setting your perfect price point. And it includes a calculator because I'm all about my spreadsheets and making things easy for you and doing the calculations for you. And you can get the pricing formula by going to wanderwealthy.com/pricing. And then, like I said, when you go through that, you will have an opportunity to get the client attraction content matrix mini course plus the tool at a very significant discount. So you can go that route or just get your hands on the matrix right away. Like I said, wanderwealthy.com/content, or go through the pricing formula loophole and head to wanderwealthy.com/pricing. And of course, the links will be located in this week's episode show notes, which are always to be found at wanderwealthypodcast.com. And those links, and I'm sure all the other links, are also in the description of this podcast episode in whatever podcast player you are tuning into. All right. Without further ado, let's dig in to my 7 keys for creating content easily and consistently. So the number one, I should add, these aren't in any kind of set order. So it's not like number one at the top, but just the first one is to redefine what that word means to you, that consistency word. So many of my clients, when we're working together, get really bogged down by this idea of consistency because they've tuned into a few too many Instagram experts or Facebook marketing gurus who say, you need to be posting every single day, 3 times a day in order for you to, get seen. And that's, you need to be posting consistently. And then they mention every single day, 3 times a day, right? Naturally, okay, if we connect those two terms, then we're going to think consistency means every single day, multiple times a day. Now, here's the deal. Posting more will help get more eyeballs on your stuff. right? Because you're just putting more out into the world. You're not necessarily diluting other things, although some people will argue that. You're really just giving your content more of a chance to get seen because you're posting a heck of a lot more than that. However, if you shoot your shot too soon and then you're not able to maintain and sustain that level of creation, that is when you're going to get bogged down, right? That's when this idea of posting every day is no longer very fun or enjoyable or sexy, right? So when I see people getting tripped up and having a really hard time with content creation, it's because they've misinterpreted this idea of being consistent. Now, being consistent is important, but we need to understand what it means. And the truth is, it can mean something different for everyone. So consistency really just means doing something in the same way, however that looks, right? So that might mean, you are consistent with the type of content you create, you're consistent with the theme or the topics of your content, and that's all important, but it could also mean you are consistent with the amount of content you create in a day or in a week or in a month, right? It can mean you're consistent with the frequency that you post content and make it live and digestible. So as an example, the thing that I have never broken from my kind of schedule of posting content consistently, which if you look at my Instagram profile, you'll go, well, she's not consistent at all. And it's because Instagram is my secondary platform. My primary platform, because I've taken the time to really build up traction and find a way to get people to this platform, is the one that you're listening to. It's my podcast. Every single Thursday, you can expect, and you probably are delighted, hopefully are delighted, to see another podcast episode in your feed. That is my consistency. Weekly podcast episodes. From there, everything else for me personally is a bonus. So I still love leveraging social media because I still think it is so powerful, and it's the tool that I suggest all of my clients start out with because it allows for this beautiful synchronous relationship to build with your ideal clientele, right? If it's a podcast, if you start with a podcast or a blog or a YouTube channel, you have no idea who's consuming that. And then the only way to actually create a relationship is to add another form of communication, which is like an email list. So I want to remove those walls and allow you to start off on a platform that allows for that synchronous communication and also allows you to maintain this consistency and show up and just be as simple as possible, right? So this is not necessarily a do as I say, not as I do kind of thing, but in a way it is. And I apologize for that because I know that that can be confusing. But if you need a model and an example of consistency, think about this podcast. Think about other creators who you do see showing up, but think about how often you see them showing up. Sure, there might be some people who post 3 times a day. And then there might be some people who are just posting weekly, and maybe they even post the same time every week on, Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever the social platform is that you are currently following them on. But they have determined the consistency that is sustainable for them. And consistency, like I said, again, it's very important. It helps set the expectations for your clients, and it's super important in the beginning when you're working to build traction. And beyond that, and when I say working to build traction, I mean people, the right type of followers, right, who are your ideal clients, and you're working on building them to see you as a person who could be of service to them, right, who is an expert in this space, who knows what they're talking about, and who speaks and creates specifically for people like them. So the consistency is super key there. But one other bonus of consistency is that it actually helps you too. As an entrepreneur, a content creator, we don't have anyone being like, you need to have 12 Instagram posts created by the end of the month for us to post next month, right? No one is holding your fingers to the fire to be like, get it done or else. So having a set schedule of like what consistency means to you, make it realistic, make it sustainable, but then determine it is really, really key. The last thing I'll mention here is that it is okay for you to switch up your consistency. Just don't switch it up too often, because then that's obviously not consistent, right? If you switch, I want to do 3 posts per week this week, and then next week you're like, that was a little too hard. I'm going to go to 1 post per week. And then the next week you go, oh, well, I heard that it's actually supposed to be 3 posts per day, so I'm going to try to do that. And then you realize that's a lot. And so the next week you change it up again. Obviously, that's not consistency. So figure out what's going to work for you, and then know you can change it. So if you do, let's say, again, and I'm just pulling arbitrary numbers, so do not take this as gospel, because even though, yes, technically the more posts you put out there, the more higher likely you're going to get seen. That's great. But again, if you're not doing it regularly, then it doesn't matter, right? If you do a budget for a week and you really hit the numbers and you're like, awesome, but it's a really strict budget, then we know if it's not sustainable, it doesn't matter, right? You're going to blow it next week anyway. So think about that. Think about it kind of in the form of a budget if you need to, right? We're the experts on the money stuff. So we can think about it in terms of that and then go, okay, now I can apply this to my business and my social media activity or whatever content creation you're working on. So the last thing I'll say is, though, it can change slightly during larger periods of time. Similar to if you had a budget, right? Maybe your budget is set so that you hit this aggressive emergency savings goal 3 months from now. So you budget a certain way for 3 months. It's consistent. You can stick to it. It's sustainable. And then the 3 months is up. You've hit your goal. Well, no, duh, you can tweak your budget. Same thing with your consistency schedule. If you hit a goal, you stick to your consistency schedule for a set period of time. Let's call it 3 months as well. Let's say it's posting 3 times per week. You hit your goal. Maybe it's to have a certain number of clients, and now your focus is to be more on delivering your clients a great experience. Then maybe you tweak it to posting 2 times or 1 time per week. You don't tweak it enormously. You don't just like stop posting altogether, but you decide, I'm going to tweak my consistency schedule for maybe it's the next 3 months so that I can focus on something else, but I'm still maintaining something that feels doable and sustainable to me. All right. So that's it. That's all I'm going to talk about in terms of consistency. And hopefully it's the longest one of these 7 keys to creating content that's easy and consistent. Hopefully it's the longest point that I go in on. Okay. Number 2, don't wait for motivation, momentum, or inspiration to strike. You have to create it. Okay. Sometimes something will hit and you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's a brilliant idea for a piece of content. But a lot of times you got to create it yourself. So know that. I think so many of us think, okay, an author, right? Who's a famous author? Brené Brown, Elizabeth Gilbert. They are people who we assume are very prolific. They have the words to write. And we assume that they're just like always motivated and inspired, and they have a lot of momentum, and that's what allows them to write multiple books. But that is not the case. A good book that kind of talks about this, and I don't know if it's worth the time to read unless you're really, really struggling with taking action. And I'll probably mention this again in the episode that I'm creating around action taking. But a good book is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And he basically talks about, any kind of writer, their job, if you think about people who get paid to write, right? Just like those authors that I listed, they don't just wait for that inspiration. They write every single day, no matter if they're feeling inspired, if they're feeling motivated or not. And similar for you as an entrepreneur, especially when you're starting out and you don't have a lot of resources to pour into someone who can create the content for you or into someone who can do the sales, you have to wear those hats. And so one of your hats is going to be being a content creator, being a writer. And in order for you to get paid to write, you have to treat it like a job, and you have to show up even if the motivation isn't there, even if the creative spark and inspiration isn't there. But guess what? You can create it. Some things that I do to create motivation or inspiration are just to change up my environment. I'll go take a shower, I'll wash my face, I'll light a candle, I'll burn a Palo Santo stick, I will maybe even actually go to a coffee shop and treat myself with my favorite beverage, but then say, okay, you're in this environment, you've just clocked into your work as a writer, now it's time to write. And I know that sometimes that can sound easier said than done, but you just have to start. I think everyone knows that the hardest part of writing is starting. And I remember that from like high school and college writing papers days. But once I got started, everything kind of was pulled out of me from there. So you really just have to reframe this idea of, oh, I'm not inspired, or I can't, I don't have the creative capacity or thoughts to write, and know that actually motivation, momentum, and inspiration don't just like strike people all the time. And that's why they're creative and paid for, creating. They have to create their own. And when they show up and make it happen, that's when the amazing words hit the page. That's when the content in whatever form is truly created. All right. Number 3 is to intimately know your ideal client so that you can tap into what they need to hear today. I know I've mentioned this before, and of course I've kind of berated this topic when it came to niching and how important a niche is. But if you're finding yourself stuck in the creative process, especially for creating content that converts, revisit what you know about your ideal clients. And if you are lacking that knowledge, go out and get it. Your time is going to be very well spent doing some on-the-ground research of who your ideal client is, what they need, what they feel, what they're afraid of, what they're experiencing right now, what they have tried in the past that didn't work for them, what they want their situation to look like, all of those things. And that's really going to help you kind of get to the point where you are remembering what you used to not know, right? Right now, you are probably unconsciously competent, where you're not really aware of the things that you already know. And therefore, in the past, what you didn't know that you had to go out and learn. But what you need to write, the content you need to create, is the content for the people who are typically consciously incompetent. They know what they do not know, and therefore they're kind of showing up to your page to get the answers, or potentially unconsciously incompetent, where they don't know what they don't know, but they happen to stumble upon your page and then have those aha moments where they're like, this is what I was looking for, right? So there are some people who know what they don't know and know they need to go out and find a solution, but there's also people who don't know what they don't know, and we're kind of creating content for both of those sets of people, okay? So in order to do that, you really have to know your ideal clients. I think another piece to this is having content pillars. When you have content pillars, which represent kind of higher level topics that you repeatedly talk about, right? Like the content pillars that I repeatedly talk about are sales and marketing, mindset around entrepreneurship, building and delivering a money coaching program, and knowing your ideal client and how to ultimately price your services, right? Those are the like high level content pillars that I talk about. And guess what? They're also high level levels of transformation that all of my clients go through within the Wealthy Coach Blueprint. So my content pillars really reflect what I know my ideal clients need, and also the things that I teach inside of my program. So if things seem repetitive like I'm beating a dead horse sometimes, it's because that's the point. I need you to know what I'm going to teach you, what I stand for, what I'm all about, so that you know exactly what to expect, and you know what you're going to learn further when you join my programs, or if you meet someone who is consciously or unconsciously incompetent in some of those areas, you know where to send them. Okay? So having this really firm knowing of who your ideal clients are and what they need and what they want and what they're afraid of and what they've tried and what works for them and what doesn't work for them, so that you can fill those gaps, and then creating content pillars and obviously a program to help that will help you create content without a second thought. All right. Number 4, understanding the buyer's journey. So the buyer's journey is something that I believe HubSpot came up with, but there's a lot of different kind of ways that you can consider this. But the buyer's journey is, I think, pretty self-explanatory, and it's really just the process that a prospect will go through when they're making a decision to purchase a solution that they need. So kind of related to what I was talking about with your ideal client and really wanting to create content for those who are unconsciously incompetent or consciously incompetent. And I feel like that's kind of harsh to say, like, I've pinpointed you as unconsciously incompetent, but let's take the like feelingsness out of that and just know that that's just kind of how we're grouping people based off of their level of understanding of the topic at hand, without being like, incompetence is a bad word. Anyway, sorry, I got lost in my own thoughts there. But the buyer's journey sort of reflects that. And really, when you think about a buyer, they are going through various stages, right? At one point, they don't know what they don't know. Therefore, they don't know what they need. Therefore, they don't really know or aren't even looking for a solution, but there is a problem there. And as they mature through that, they either can stumble upon a solution and then realize like, oh, this is actually exactly what I need, and I just didn't know how to put words to it. Or they connect with the person and then realize what it is that they offer and then make that decision of like, oh, yes, I do need this. Or they might, get to a point where they actually know what they don't know. They know what they need. They know where their gaps are, and they know what they're looking for and what they need to fill it. And then eventually they will ultimately make the decision to actually fill it and move on from there. So when we're thinking about those various stages, what HubSpot has created in terms of the buyer's journey is to kind of replicate that. So this breaks down into awareness stage, consideration stage, decision stage, and delight stage. So as a prospect is moving through the buyer's journey, they're first in the awareness stage where they're just getting to know you and what it is that you stand for. That might be someone who is unconsciously incompetent in that topic that maybe you teach on. But as they start to get to know you or start to have those ahas of what it is that you stand for and what you provide, they can move into the consideration stage where maybe they will be more of someone who is consciously incompetent. So they know what they don't know and what it is that they need and where they might be lacking. And then, once they kind of see that you know what you're talking about in that consideration stage, they're considering maybe you as a potential solution to what it is their problem is, or not you, but your offering and your program. Then they might move into the decision stage where they're ultimately deciding, do I want to hire you specifically? And then we get into the delight stage, meaning they become a customer, and now we are focused on delighting them so that they can potentially, and the goal would be to refer more people to you and more people to go through that buyer's journey. So that's a little debrief, but I think really understanding that at a deeper level is going to help you create content and create a variety of content that is effective, but also do it easier and consistently, because you can take one kind of theme, right? If we look at the content pillars, you can take one theme of content and you can break it up into multiple different pieces of content just by creating content various types of content that fit in various stages of the buyer's journey. So that's a big thing that we do inside of the content matrix. We go even further in the client attraction content matrix program to teach you about the buyer's journey and give you examples, and to, of course, give you the content matrix tool, which helps you kind of automatically create all of this really good content. All right, number 5 is practice. So if creating content easily and consistently is not something that is, happening for you, then we have to practice, right? Your content creation ability is a muscle. And we know, if you've done any sort of physical activity in your life, you know that it gets easier with practice. And you have to remember that like the first few times are never fun, right? Or they suck, or they're hard. And like, maybe you got lucky one of those many times, but like then the next day it's hard again and it doesn't feel good. And oftentimes you want to give up because you're like, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. But the more you practice, the easier it gets. You just have to be willing to go through those first few attempts that aren't as fun, right? That aren't going so great. So one thing that I think is important here is that I think our nature as human beings, especially who've grown up and gone through kind of the traditional schooling that we often face, especially in the Western world, is we're constantly trying to reach for perfection before we even start. A lot of us won't even start unless we know for sure that we're going to be a success. And man, that's sad. Lately I've been thinking a lot about getting into like pottery and ceramics and just like exploring a little bit more of a creative edge. And I'm thinking about the end product and like, oh, how amazing will it be to have, some beautiful vases or vases, however you say that, and some beautiful mugs to drink from. But then I'm like, oh, but there's like so much that I have to figure out, and there's a lot of learning, and I'm sure like there's going to be a lot of wasted money and time on creating things that aren't good. And that's so sad. Isn't that so sad for us that we think about all the things that are going to go wrong when it's like, the stakes aren't actually that high, right? If you haven't quit your job and you're pursuing a business, an online business, you haven't quit your job yet, or you have other sources of income and some form of stability, then the stakes aren't really that high. And yet we still stop ourselves from starting because we think it has to be perfect the first time. That is so sad. So I kind of equate this to us trying to edit a blank page, right? Our perfectionism has just run rampant. We've been primed and built and wired to believe that it has to be an A+ or it's not even worth doing. But how much beauty is there in trying? How much beauty is there in making a crummy first version? How much beauty is there in just the process? And honestly, from, my short years that I've lived on this earth, and, I haven't achieved wildly, world-changing things, but I think I've achieved some things. I can say that the actual achievement of the goal is not as fun and is not as fulfilling as the process of working towards the goal. So it's so sad that our mind plays these tricks on us and makes us believe that it's not even worth pursuing if we know it's not going to be good the first time. And we try to edit ourselves before we even get to experience and experiment and try and potentially fail. Like we're so wired to avoid failure and avoid anything that's less than perfect. And therefore we don't. So be willing to make a shitty first draft. Be willing to practice and know that the more you practice, the better you'll become, the easier it'll be, the quicker you'll be able to do it. And then not to say that you might not enjoy it anymore, but then you'll probably take it for granted and have to find a new thing that's going to challenge you, because really what is the most enjoyable part is like figuring it out. So that's what I have to say about that. Number 6 is scheduling that practice. Okay, so we talked about consistency and determining what consistency is going to mean for you. And we've talked about the importance of practicing and having a shitty first draft and just like, aim for failure and know that the beauty is going to come through that process. But now you got to go and you got to schedule being sucky, which is so ridiculous. But like, come on, this is us being humans. This is us being humans building a business. So accept that not everything is going to be perfect, but be willing to practice, be willing to try, and now put it in your schedule so you can make sure that you do it. Okay. This is where time blocking and content batching, so that you're not context switching, is really going to come in handy. And I've talked about this at length. You can, of course, go to my content routine episode again. And I have a couple more episodes that I refer to within that episode. So it's like a little nesting doll that you can unravel, but really just setting aside time to do this practice, right? If I don't actually set aside time and find the studio where I can actually throw clay or whatever the concept is, believe me, I haven't actually taken these steps, but I need to. Now I'm going to use this podcast to hold me accountable. I'll never actually get to it. So you got to set the time aside. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but it just has to be time where then you're willing to actually take action. And again, there's going to be another podcast episode coming out about action and kind of our expectation of time and what we need to have available to us in order for us to even attempt taking action. So just be on the lookout for that. But in short, even 20 minutes of action is better than nothing. So use that for now. Okay. The seventh and final is, I think, the most fun of all, and it's probably the easiest of all, and it's one that I don't want you to lean on as a crutch, but I do think it is probably very important when it comes to you wanting to create content easier and more consistently and better content overall, is to actually read great writing, read great content, consume great content. Now, here's the deal. If you're going to do this, you have to promise me that you are going to create before you consume. Okay, so you got to protect your brain because your brain has incredible things to say. But if you fill it with someone else's stuff, it's much more likely that you're going to be creating someone else's stuff. But also, I think it can get in the way of the magic that you can unravel from, creating first. So create before you consume, but then know that there are some really great writers out there and there are some really kind of creative minds. And I do invite you to consume a little bit, to read within your boundaries. I think you should just like you set time aside to practice, then maybe later in the day, set a little 30-minute block for you to read. So put some boundaries in place so you don't decide that that's the most productive thing, because it's not, right? It's not. Taking action is far more productive than reading and ingesting and consuming, but it can be really helpful when you're feeling stuck to actually read great content from other writers, because I think it just turns on a part of the brain. For me, reading great content kind of reminds me that I'm allowed to be myself. I'm allowed to speak in the way that I speak or write in the way that I speak. I'm allowed to kind of make my own rules, right? We're not writing research papers for our business class. We are writing content that's supposed to resonate with our ideal clients. So you can make your own rules. You can use punctuation in a way that helps express the way that you said something as opposed to accurately using it. Of course, if you're writing for a company and you're getting paid for it, you want to make sure that the grammar and use of punctuation is appropriate. But when it's you and it's your content and your platform, you can use words and the way to spell words and the use of punctuation in a way that can help express what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it. And I think that's really beautiful. And one of my favorite writers is Ash Amberjay, and her website is themiddlefingerproject.org. Not joking. But reading her writing, and I've also taken some of her copywriting classes in the past. I don't know if she offers those anymore, but early on, I started following her, and reading her writing really allowed me to feel like, wow, there's a way that you can write that is able to also express who you are, how you talk, and all of those good things too. So, she's one where I read and I'm like, I'm connected to this, and this gives me the permission to write in a certain way. But I think whoever you can find that you really connect with can help you see how writing content that not only connects with your ideal clients in a way that is strategic, where I walk you through within the client attraction content matrix, but also reading other writers in more of the kind of like emotional intelligence of how their writing takes place, can also help you connect with your ideal clients. And it just makes writing more fun when you get to do it following your own rules. So that's the final piece. And I think, like I said, it's the more fun one, and it is stupid effective. But you also have to set some boundaries around it and not get too carried away or fall too far into a rabbit hole of just consuming instead of creating. So make sure you create before you consume. That's it. Those are my 7 keys to creating content easily and more consistently. I hope that you're able to take at least one and implement it into your life and your business, and create some content that you feel really good about. And like I said, if you're stumped on what to write about, you're probably asking the wrong questions, and you need to get yourself inside of the client attraction content matrix. It is a program that you can consume in the span of a weekend, and then a tool that you can set up in that weekend, that same weekend, but then use every single week for the rest of your life of your business, as long as you want to run it. And you can get it by going to wanderwealthy.com/content, or like I said, the sneaky pricing formula loophole. Head to wanderwealthy.com/pricing, purchase yourself the pricing formula, and then therefore you'll get that special price point for the client attraction content matrix. That's a wrap. Get this week's episode show notes by going to wanderwealthypodcast.com/podcast/episode 243. And until next time, I hope you wander wealthy.